Stephen, I am so happy that you're on the show today because I just signed up for a conference I was telling you about next week, and it feels like everything is about AI. But I feel like when people think of AI, they think robotic or it sounds like everybody else. And you kind of bring that human connection back to AI, I think, which is a lot like we work with this guy George B. Thomas, and he's like, at the center of everything is humanity and connecting. So I can't wait to talk to you about everything we're going to dive into today. But before we do, I have an icebreaker question for you. And I'm so excited because you picked the one that we love when guests pick this one because we think the funniest stories come out of it. But what is the wildest thing that has happened to you as a solopreneur?
So my solopreneur career started when the internet was invented. So we did not have that when I was a kid or when I was in college. So this was really kind of the birth of digital marketing. Uh, I would say this is the Wild West days of internet marketing. So I had a regular nine to five job, but I would come home and I would, sit on my bed with my laptop and figured out search engine marketing. And there was this thing, that all the SEO purists back then were mad about, and that was paid search. And literally, this was like the invention of paid search. And I'm like, oh, so this is the future. So I hopped on there. Went, there's a company called goto.com we get into, and I would be in there, and I taught myself how to build these crude web pages and everything. And I'd be in there and selling stuff. But back then, you could see what everybody was bidding against each other, and so it became really personal with bidding against each other. But it also became this form of like torture, right? Where, because if you fell out of first place or into second place, that could cost you like thousands of dollars. And so during the holidays, you were on your computer as pretty much, if you could skip sleep, you would, because you just couldn't help but be on there because, someone's changing that bid on you. So it was this form of madness that we were just locked into back then. And we're just bidding, and eventually, my goal was to make money. So when we had kids, we could be able to afford them. And so I ended up at one point, I'm starting to make more money than I'm making more than my day job. And, that bidding thing where if I'm not there doing that, I'm losing money going to work. So I was losing money going to work for my day job. And so it's like, okay, obviously I've got to quit that. And at the time I was working from a mother. It's like, sorry, mom. I really got to quit.
At least she'll love you regardless.
I know. At least she'll love me regardless. But it was like, it was a couple of years after a divorce and she's taken over this business, and we're at least having record years. And I'm like, all right, you're in good hands. I got to go do this. But finally, after 3 or 4 years of doing this madness with his bidding, especially during the holidays, they finally made the bids disappear. And that was like sweet release from this torture that I didn't know I was putting myself through for several years. And it was like, oh my gosh, I can't see what everyone else is doing anymore. Oh, I can see suddenly I just felt like alive again. But it was like these awful early days of the Wild West of the internet. But it was just madness back then.
You see that because it sounds like you're in the trenches, and so much what you do now revolves around empathy. And I'm like, do you just have empathy for people because of what you went through?
Yeah, I was young and there was no empathy for myself. It was just like, Gen X, we like to grind, I think, a lot. And so it was like, yeah, this is just what you do. But yeah, for sure, that job satisfaction, that work-life balance stuff, yeah, I was feeling it there. You don't want to get that burnout.
I'm sure. Well, speaking of empathy, you have this acronym BLISS, Build Love Into Scalable Systems. What inspired you to, if it wasn't that, what inspired you to bring empathy into business in this tangible, concrete way?
Yeah, so there's this stage in kind of your entrepreneurial journey where you need help at some point. If you're doing well, you start to scale. And these days that scaling could come from even an AI agent, right? It could be, and you could still be that solo preneur there. But when you scale, you start to systemize. And so what worried me at the time, we were starting to grow as a company. So I went from that solopreneur to 40 people, and we were growing pretty fast at one point. And so what I was worried about was the loss of culture. Because before it could just be me one-on-one with the clients, and I know that things were going to be done kind of the way we wanted to do with kind of that empathetic approach, really caring about the best interests of the clients. But I couldn't oversee everything now. So it's like, we need a guiding principle. And so we came up with, well, build love into scalable systems. How can we build love into what we're doing? And really, this became the North Star of everything we're doing. So no matter what we're doing, whatever part of our business, it was a check-in. It's like, well, how can we build love into this? And I think, you might find when you're doing this, which certainly we did, was really how you are really in service to others. Because this is this very kind of empathetic process, this loving process. You go through all these stages of understanding your clients and your customers and your fellow employees. So through that, you might also find your higher purpose in that process. And so what we did was just basically audit our business by love. It's like, how can we build love into this? And just keep asking that question. And it's like little by little, a little made a lot. And it started just changing our culture, even changing the approach to marketing that we do, to really get into this sort of empathetic marketing approach to what we're doing.
Well, I love this because you're talking about this with your team, but a lot of the times solopreneurs work with contractors and a lot of contractors who aren't actual employees, but you still have to put processes together, if not more so when they're not under your employee umbrella. So, what can solopreneurs be doing as a first step to building love into their systems?
Yeah, I think, just by asking that question, that's a mind shift change for sure. So it really is just taking an empathetic look at maybe how you onboard clients, right? What emotions are they going through? What are they worried about? How are you showing up where you can alleviate that? Or like your contractors are not. Are we making sure we're doing this the way we want to do it? So we studied corporate scandals and we kind of broke down their systems where they ultimately failed. And I think there were a couple key areas in the systems, and they're both very empathetic parts of a system. You don't really think of that, but these were the key areas. And one was the feedback loop of a system. So, a system goes through all these processes, and in the end, there's a feedback loop. So in the scandal companies, it was always either ignored or buried or not paid attention to. So as a solopreneur, I think you really need to kind of actively pursue that feedback from the customers you serve. So that's really kind of vital, because that's going to keep you, in that empathetic mindset. The other key area where things broke down was around purpose, the purpose of the system or the purpose of the business. So if it wasn't an empathetic purpose, so if my sole purpose was profit, well, then you aren't asking, how does this part of my business impact the environment, or how does this impact the well-being of customers? Am I selling something that's not in their best interest? So this is where you really get going sideways sometimes with your business, is when you're not really looking at all the different ways you affect people. Like you mentioned, if you've got, partners that you're working with or, contracting to, you're affecting them as well. There's a relationship here that you can look into. Your clients, you really want to look at that through their eyesight, kind of what they're going through as a client of yours. But the more we can kind of expand our perspectives, this is how we evolve consciously. I mean, if you're looking at the evolution of consciousness and humans, it's really our ability to take on more and more perspectives. So it's this empathetic process that we get to. So this is really, in a way, this is kind of the future of where business is going, is leaning into more and more empathy as we evolve as humans.
Well, so let me ask you this. So if people are being empathetic, sometimes that can be a big weight on people's shoulders as well. They might get overly invested into how their clients are feeling or their contractors and all that. And it can just be a heavy weight. How can people care a lot without burning out? I mean, I would imagine some people would they care so much that they play the yes game and not say no to things. And it kind of turns into a cycle. So how can people avoid that?
Yeah, I know with my experiences with burnout, personally and things like that, this really goes back to trying to find a higher purpose in what you do. So, and even that higher purpose may even turn into like a life purpose for you. So you want to be able to do hard, challenging things, right? But if you're feeling like it's a soul sucking process, that's going to burn you out. And a lot of solopreneurs probably have even left the corporate world because it was just sucking their souls. It felt like they're, opening up a vein every day, 9 to 5. And all the data right now, says that's what's happening, because 4 out of 5 workers are disengaged at work right now. So it is a very unhealthy thing where it's this lack of caring, really, though, that happens. It's not too much caring for each other. It's really this lack of caring, I think. So if you really lean into the empathy of what you're doing, though, this often helps you find that higher purpose and gives you energy. And so I think real care is almost actually what helps you avoid burnout. So there's this example. I think Simon Sinek told this story about there is this luggage handler, who, you go to an airport and he's handling all the luggage for people, but he's got to go in during Christmas, the middle of winter. And this sounds like it could be, leaving his family. And this is not a fun time to be leaving your family and having to do all this. And his son was asking, like, hey, Dad, why do you have to go into work? And he's like, well, I've got to go there because there are grandpas and grandmas trying to get to their families right now. And Dad has to help them do that. And it's like that higher purpose, finding that higher why of what you're doing. That's what gives you the energy to push through those things that could be like these very, burning out kind of activities. So I think, that is really the key is probably not, I know as we've got clients and you do care about them and you worry, and sometimes you'll, may even wreck your sleep. But I do think that care is really, the lack of it is what gives us more burnout.
Yeah. I love that approach. I just feel like you bring such like human qualities to a world that like I feel like it's lacking in so many different areas. And on that note, you co-founded aiCMO, which is an AI powered marketing platform. And there are so many solopreneurs that kind of use AI or are curious about using AI, but they just don't fully utilize it the way that they could be. So, what is your advice for getting started without losing that feeling of authenticity?
Yeah. So, with our platform, so as AI Chief Marketing Officer, it's really our most active users are solopreneurs, I think. So we look at them, they're really in there. So, but with our platform, we're doing a few things around that authenticity issue. So like the first thing we want to help you do is dig into finding that higher purpose in your business. So, we take you through this process, and probably something as a solopreneur, maybe you've never even gone through, but it digs into your values, what's important to you, and helps you articulate that why around what you're doing. And then, so you go through that process, you'll basically come up with a purpose. Maybe it's not, it doesn't necessarily have to be the most eloquently, tight purpose, but it's a purpose that speaks to the deeper parts of who you are and what you do. So we're going to use that kind of as an anchor, to guide where you're going with your marketing. We want to make sure we're always speaking around that purpose, because that's going to really bring out that authenticity in what you're doing. There are other things in there too, like we're looking to differentiate you from your competitors, or we'll scan your whole website and look at your brand voice, whatever you're doing to kind of make it sound like you too. But ultimately, when you get down to it, for that real authenticity, it's going through this exercise to determine what is really truly important to you and get to that real authenticity, because that's really what's going to shine through, I think. And we really want AI to kind of prompt you to be a better human by kind of doing this. Not, we're thinking always about prompting AI. This is really AI coming at you to prompt you, going through these exercises to really kind of elevate what you're doing.
So, how do you use AI to deepen that human connection with your audience and your clients?
Yeah, so it goes back to that authenticity aspect. So when you show up like that in marketing, that's when you're going to build that emotional connection. And so those out there who maybe don't know all the deeper parts of building emotional connection in marketing, this tool really does a good job on doing that. So we'll also, it's not just the marketing that you're doing on your ads and stuff like that and your blogs, but it's also the consumption experience of your product or service. So there are, people may not realize this or care, but there are 17 different emotions when it comes to consuming your product or service, and some are negative and some are positive, and you definitely, you want to avoid those negative ones. So one of the great ways to create that emotional connection is through surprise and delight, right? So when you're dealing with a customer, so we've got a tool in there just for that. So this is going to come up with all kinds of ways to kind of surprise and delight your customers, these kind of purple goldfish thing elements, at your business. And so this really helps you make that human connection, because it's tying into these positive experiential emotions that people go through when they're interacting with you. Obviously we want to be good people, but we don't know sometimes what we don't know. So this is really helping you to do that. So ultimately with our platform, it's not so much about, again, prompting AI. It's about prompting us. Like, here's some things you can do to build, deeper connections in your business with people when they walk in, or they're interacting you via Zoom. It comes up with all kinds of amazing ideas with that. So, yeah, I love that tool in there. If you're, going to use the tool, we have free trial and everything, but it really does help to build that emotional connection.
Oh, I love that. Well, so in addition to this, like as a chief marketing officer platform, um, what do you think the top, let's say, three things should be that solopreneurs should be implementing from a marketing standpoint using AI?
So I think using AI, I'm going to focus particularly on the marketing side for sure, is like one of the things we do is take you through like this emotional customer journey. So, here's your customer, here's what they're going through at these different stages of before they're a customer, during the, as they become a customer. This is really an empathetic exercise for you. And this really has nothing to do with even writing stuff. It's just this getting in their head kind of thing to set up how you're going to talk with them, how you're going to communicate with them, to really understand them. Again, building that emotional connection with them. So I think using AI for understanding that customer journey, on a much deeper level than you've ever even thought about, it's really good. It's really good at that. I think where a lot of people can go sideways with AI is like if I'm using, say, ChatGPT, and I go in there and say I'm installing, blinds or something like that as a business, and I'll write me an article about, blinds and installing it. Well, someone, 100 miles away may be doing the same exact prompt, not very sophisticated. They're going to get a very similar result from the AI. So this is not going to be, something that sounds unique or authentic, to you. And it's probably going to fall pretty flat when you're delivering that way. So make sure, that's one of the things we tried to do, is just make sure that we're bringing all these other elements like your higher purpose, differentiating, your brand voice, things like that into this conversation before you even make that query in there. Because yeah, I think that's a lot of people's first experience with AI. Everyone has to still be prompt engineers, and thinking really through the process. Otherwise they're going to get very similar results out. So I'd say avoid that for sure. Avoid that sameness. And then really, I think one of the other good ways that will help you in business wise is maybe you don't have a mentor or a coach. Just tell AI to act like whatever, you can be in ChatGPT and act like whatever mentor you'd have, and take on that persona and provide you, some feedback about some question about your business. It can really do a good job of kind of elevating you or getting you to think outside things you just don't know about. So there's a lot of ways you can really use it as a solopreneur. I think that I wish I had, 20 years ago when I first started out.
Well, speaking of when you first started out, what would you say one system is that you wish every solopreneur would put in place today?
So like I kind of inherently knew this, and that's really that whatever you're doing, do it with love. I just kind of knew that. And I didn't know until one day that my grandfather came up to me. He's 80 years old. And he said the same exact thing to me. He was all, hey, I was just starting out my solopreneur career, having some success there. He's like, whatever you do, do it with love. And I was like, okay, this is a guy who's got 80 something, years of life experience. So maybe what I'm thinking about love and business is really that does have a strong place for it. But I didn't know for many years kind of how to make that play out in business. And it really is that simple thing of just asking yourself, what's the loving thing to do here? And I think there are ways we can do that in business that'll help us stay true to that love, and that can be taking more of like a triple bottom line approach to your business, right? So you can think about profit. This is what we all think about in business, but maybe we can have metrics toward people or planet, these other parts of our bottom lines that we can have. This is what we're doing for the planet. This is what we're doing for our customers and things like that. You can really start to measure some of those other elements beyond that that sole profit approaches, which really where we kind of focus on a lot. But I wish I had that bliss mindset, the building love into scalable systems, because what happens is you start to systemize kindness in what you're doing. And instead of it being this random act of kindness, it becomes a systemized act of kindness, and it repeatedly happens. And that impacts others. And when you can do that with consistency, there's this ripple effect in what you do. And so I think really, if you just keep asking that question and you kind of build something so that it's not this one-time thing, it's going to make a big difference around you.
Yeah, absolutely. Oh, I love that answer. Stephen, you are so great. I think what you're doing in the AI world is so important and often so forgotten. And hopefully you help so many people find success with it through this podcast and obviously with everything that you're doing. So speaking of success, we ask all of our guests this question. What is your favorite quote about success?
So there is this quote from Rumi about 800 years ago that it translates to, you are what you seek. And so I think too often we define success by money in the bank, right? That's what we seek. And we probably do that because it's something we can measure and something we can compare to others and determine, hey, how well are we doing? But success can be, the lives you've impacted, the kindness that you put into the world, or the wisdom, that you built. It can be many other things. So are you seeking something that's in service to yourself, fame, adoration, or are you seeking something that's in service to others? And I think, when we really try and think about it, maybe even on our deathbed at some point in time, it's that love that's really important to us ultimately, that love of others. So the more we can seek that, I think, that's where true success will lie. So, you are what you seek. And so what are you seeking is what I'd ask.
So great. Well, Stephen, if people want to learn more about you, aiCMO, where can they find all that information?
Well, go to aiCMO.io. And if you go to aicmo.io/start, we have a free 7-day trial and no credit card is required. But if you do put in a credit card and use promo code SOLO30, SOLO30, you can get a 30-day free trial. So you can try it out and experiment with it. And you can get a lot done in those 30 days, trust me. So yeah, go there, check that out. We'd love to have you, part of our movement.
Awesome. That is so great. Thank you so much. And all of that will be in the show notes. But thank you for coming on today. This has been wonderful.
Thanks. It was great. I loved it.
And listeners, thank you so much for tuning in. As always, please share this episode with a friend, leave that 5-star review, and subscribe on your favorite podcast platform. And we will see you next time on The Aspiring Solopreneur.